There is a Christian distortion of Nietzsche that has been going around for some time. And this distortion claims that Nietzsche essentially validated the meaning structure of Christianity. This distortion quotes from the madman parable, where Nietzsche talks about God being dead. And it claims that Nietzsche says, how should we comfort ourselves in that parable? We, the murderers of all murderers. And they interpret this as being Nietzsche saying that once we destroyed God, we destroyed all possibility of meaning. We destroyed all possibility of hope. And of course this is not his position. This is what happens when Christians, from their theological simplicity, fatalistic and nihilistic simplicity, try to interpret the more sophisticated thought of Nietzsche. In Thus Spake Zarathustra, in the section on Afterworldsmen, he says, "Thus I too once cast my deluded fancy beyond mankind, like all afterworldsmen." So here he's talking about believing in an afterlife, believing in heaven, believing that the hope is not in this life, it's in the life that's to come. So he's casting all of his care and his hope into this idealistic form. But then he says, beyond mankind in reality? And what he means by this question is, wait a second, isn't this idea of an afterworld, and isn't this idea of a heaven and all of this stuff, isn't this just made up by humans? Ah, brothers, he says, this God which I created was human work and human madness, like all gods. So it's very important that Nietzsche understands that God is an invented construct. That's how he views it. That's what it is. It's an invented construct, and he views all gods this way. And further, there is an element of madness to it, because essentially humans construct this deity from an inability to cope with reality. When they see earthquakes and lightning and eclipses, and they get terrified, and there's animals that are attacking them, and all of the things that they experience on this hostile planet, they're frightened. And so to cope with that, they construct this idea of God. He says he was human, and only this God God was human, and only a poor piece of man and ego. There's an anthropomorphic element to this, and the ego element to it. Well, there's a God who loves us. He cares for us above everything else in the entire universe that he's made. We are just so special. We are just so great. There's this strong ego element that is attached to it. Isn't it interesting that God just so happens to love us? We just happen to be the greatest species that has ever walked the face of this earth. Out of all the other species, he just loves us the most. This phantom came to me from my own fire and ashes. That is the truth. It did not come to me from the beyond. So Nietzsche is here shattering the cultural delusion into which he was born, the cultural delusion which has been passed down through the species. He's here breaking out of abstract idealism of theism, and he's realizing that it is constructed by man. What happened, my brothers, he says, I, the sufferer, overcame myself and carried my own ashes to the mountain. I made for myself a brighter flame, and behold, the phantom fled from me. I made for myself a brighter flame. Meaning he overcame this component, this defective component in human psychology, which clings to the abstract idealism, constructs the abstract idealism of a deity to cope with the unpleasantness of existence. He essentially overcame that, came to terms with the reality, and realized that these were projections and constructs made by humans. And most importantly, he realized that he could do better, that humans can do better. It's easy to miss this point. The point here is that all of the value and benefit that a human gets, social and psychological, from God, well, God's a construct. So if you're getting that benefit from something that humans constructed, can you construct something better? It's an incredible question. And the answer for Nietzsche is yes. We don't have to limit ourselves to this subconscious, reactionary construction. Later on in this text, in the section of the higher men, he says, "But now this God has died." So we're back to this death of God notion. "You higher men, this God was your greatest danger." So far from seeing God as some important, idealistic structure that sustains so much important, vital, psychological and infrastructure, he sees this as the greatest danger to the species because of the way it subverts them and gets them to look away from reality and focus on abstract idealism instead. Focus on abstractions over reality itself. "Only since he has lain in the grave," talking about God, "have you again been resurrected." So when you're projecting this God, you're not living in life, you're just projecting this concept, this phantom, this deity. You're not actually facing life, you're filtering everything through this. It's only after this God died that you have been risen up to a real life where you can now truly live. This is not the Christian distortion of Nietzsche. Nietzsche is not a practitioner of this distortion that Christians are accusing him of. Only now does the great noontide come. Only now does the higher man become Lord and Master. That is, instead of creating a deity and then projecting it above himself, man has now gone back to a position where he is in charge of his own life, where he is on his own in this world. He must work together. He must use his intelligence to construct what makes sense to cultivate a higher quality of well-being, a higher existence that is actually worth living. "Have you understood this saying, O my brothers? Are you terrified? Do your hearts fail? Does the abyss here yawn for you? Does the hound of hell here yelp at you?" Now he anticipates here something very important. Nietzsche knows that the Christian position, the religious position, has been preconditioned, psychologically preconditioned, to react in a negative way, to embrace a form of nihilism, or to collapse into a nihilism once this idealism is shattered. It's a way that the cult keeps the individual locked in the cult by claiming that outside of these beliefs you have nothing. You have no meaning. The world is black. Forget it. You might as well not even try. All the meaning and all the hope is bound up in this great grand ideal. Well, Nietzsche knows that humans have been preconditioned by these religious cults to respond in this way of terror, in this way of fear, in this way of nihilism. Then he says, "Very well, come on, you higher men. Only now does the mountain of mankind's future labor. God has died, and now we desire that the Superman shall live." So many people won't be able to make it to this point. They will turn back with their consciousness. Their consciousness will turn around and try to go back to the idealism because they're afraid. That's why. And that's what generated the construct of God in the first place. That's what brought man to belief to begin with. And that's what drives him back at this point. Nietzsche can see, are you afraid? Are you terrified? Do the gates of hell open up for you? So yes, I'm afraid. I'm going to run away from this now. I'm very afraid. I'm going to go back to this. But he calls out, very well, come on, you higher men. Those who can actually understand that we are primates floating on a planet in the black void of space. We have to labor for our future, to make the world better for ourselves and our children. No deity is going to do it for us. The lie of the afterworld, the delusion of the afterworld is not a reality. It's a fiction that we made up in our own heads. We have to labor. God has died. This grand ideal, this abstract ideal, we finally put it to rest. We have advanced in our consciousness. We have transcended our psychological limitation in this sense. That's very important. That's what Nietzsche sees it as. It's essentially a psychological limitation. God has died. Now we desire that the Superman shall live. The Superman is simply just a self-conscious human being that tries to create an intelligent culture. That's it. It's just a human being that is trying to do the best it possibly can to construct ideals that make more sense for it to follow. That ideals that will lead to our progress as a species, our expansion of quality life as a species, and to raise ourselves up as far as we can and as high as we possibly can. So the Christian distortion of Nietzsche is unacceptable. These individuals are individuals who turned back at the point of being terrified when he refers to when they saw the abyss, when they saw the gates of hell open up. They turned back because they have not overcome this psychological barrier of God.